recording. Okay. Right. So hello, everyone. Welcome to, my name is Rocco Cremonese. I'm the chair of the West Pennsylvania, West Virginia ACRL Chapter Professional Development Committee. And thank you all for coming to this, our fifth in the Western Pennsylvania, West Virginia ACRL Professional Development web series. We have with you Sarah Mollette today, for the online learning librarian from Marshall University. And she's going to present to us about burnout, and I'll just turn the floor over to Sarah in a second. If you have any questions throughout, please type them in chat. We have a very large group today, which is awesome and fantastic, but may also make question management kind of important. So if you can type questions in chat, whether you have them ongoing through the presentation, then we can get them to the end and try. And Sarah, do you want me to act as a moderator for questions? Just read questions on the chat and research. Up to you. Sorry about that. Had to mute everyone. But yes, so it's totally up to you, Sarah. And otherwise, I will turn the floor over to you. And thank you, everyone, for attending this.
Great, thank you, Rocco. And I think that I've allowed for a few minutes at the end, so we can do questions at that point, if that works. So hello, everyone. Welcome to my presentation. As Rocco said, I'm Sarah Mollette from Marshall University, and today I'm going to briefly define workplace burnout in order to provide strategies for avoiding and overcoming it. And hopefully these strategies will resonate for anyone who was maybe on the cusp of burnout before COVID, or fully suffering from it before COVID, or maybe experiencing it because of COVID. So I do want you to know that I'm kind of a fast talker and we do have a lot to cover, but Rocco has the link to a page where I have this presentation that we're about to go through, as well as a handout that summarizes everything. So if you feel like you've missed anything, just wait, because that'll be available to you later. Okay, so there is a popular Aerosmith song called Jaded. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. If you are, and it's now in your head, just get used to it because it will be there for a while. But one of the lines really stood out, and it's the one that I have on the screen there. It's, "You're so jaded, and I'm the one that jaded you." And I imagine that some days we may feel as though it's our very own beloved libraries that are singing that to us. And I just cracked myself up thinking about that. But I'm sorry if that song is stuck in your head now. So it does not take long when researching the term workplace burnout to see that there have been a lot of studies conducted. There are several theoretical approaches to defining it, and there's an entire Twitter hashtag situation that tells me we all probably have an idea of what burnout is. But in case you don't, it's simply defined as a psychological syndrome caused by job stress. So I'm going to go through some of the foundational theories very quickly, because understanding the cause of the problem will ideally help us solve it. So you can see I have first there the 80s. It's a simpler time, weren't they? So at that time, burnout was being defined as an imbalance between work demands and individual resources, as well as emotional responses of exhaustion and anxiety, and changes in attitudes and behavior. It's important to remember these are not occasional feelings of stress, but prolonged, regular attacks on your mental and emotional health. And it's possible that maybe some of us have felt just a few of these things since March of this year, if not before. That's just a hunch. So then we have the 90s, and the focus sort of zeroed in on the concept of a loss of resources, or the threat of a loss of resources. And I'm assuming we can relate to that, because in our profession, it seems as though there's always some lawmaker or journalists declaring that there's no longer a need for libraries. And each time that happens, we assume our budgets will be cut and our jobs are at risk. So this underlying threat is not only something we normally have to deal with, but this year it has just been exacerbated. We know as academic librarians that our universities rely on students coming to campus. And this fall we have seen horrendous enrollment problems, which have really forced a lot of universities to make hard decisions about budgets and personnel. And this relates directly into whether or not we can effectively do our jobs. And if we can't, it takes a toll on us. So next we have the early 2000s, where some authors were considering the idea that burnout happens because a person does not mesh well with the job itself. So whether that is the entire profession or just a particular workplace or that specific role, this is also something we've probably all experienced for one reason or another. However, this year, it's very likely that the loss of resources or personnel has resulted from COVID, which has led to us maybe being asked to do things that we were not quite hired to do, which maybe we haven't been trained to do, which is maybe happening within a less than ideal transition period, all of which can result in a mismatch between our personality, the expectations we had going into a job, and the reality of what that job has become. And lastly, from later in the 2000s, which is, I believe, if my math is correct, about 1,000 years ago, then we see research that points to burnout being caused by incessant job demands and includes the theme that we mentioned earlier about not having the adequate resources to address those demands. So one thing that many of those theoretical approaches was based on is the opposing concepts of disengagement versus engagement. So either we get lucky and none of those situations happen, or if they do, they're not prolonged, which allows us to maintain our professional engagement, which leads to job satisfaction. Or one or more of those situations has occurred, which results in detachment, which leads to burnout. And as we can imagine, burnout is associated not just with job dissatisfaction, but also low organizational commitment, absenteeism, intention to leave the job, and leaving the job. So for people who are burnt out but they stay on the job, they see lower productivity and an impaired quality of work. Then, as burnout diminishes opportunities for positive experiences at work, these employees have decreased job satisfaction and a reduced commitment to their job or their organization. And we work at universities and we know that we are faces and voices for recruitment and admissions. And when we don't have that connection, it can really impact a lot of things. On the other hand, cynicism, which is a common symptom of burnout, has been found to be the pivotal aspect that predicts turnover. Apparently, it fuels the connection between feeling as if we are being bullied in the workplace and intending to quit our jobs or actually quitting. And unfortunately, people who are experiencing burnout can actually have a negative impact on their colleagues, both by causing greater personal conflict and disrupting job tasks. So burnout is actually considered to be contagious, and it perpetuates itself through social interactions on the job. And many of us know, either from personal experience or from knowing someone, that a psychological condition such as burnout can either manifest itself as a physical condition or somehow aggravate an existing physical condition. In addition to the mental health problems caused by burnout, it has also been shown to contribute to muscle tension, exhaustion, headaches, high blood pressure, gastrointestinal disorders, and a clear link between burnout and cardiovascular disease has been established in multiple studies. So that concludes the extremely depressing discussion of what burnout is, the causes of it, and the possible ramifications. Again, that's because the better we understand a problem, the easier it will be for us to try to solve it. And also the easier it will be for us to talk to our library leadership about it. So the rest of our time today will be focused on methods for avoiding or overcoming burnout and job disengagement. In fact, you may have noticed that I've mentioned that term disengagement a few times. And if you'll remember from an earlier slide, and as an individual disengages from work, job burnout is likely to occur. So on the flip side, if you are engaged with your job, then you have energy, you are involved, and you feel like you're contributing. So these are the goals we're working towards when we talk about methods for avoiding or overcoming burnout. So how do we go from disengagement to engagement? How do we organically form high energy? How do we feel involved? And where do we find that missing sense of value, especially if we've been struggling? Or if it's too late to avoid burnout, how do we overcome it in order to return to that state of being? And once we overcome burnout, what are the best methods for keeping that mentality? So the good news is most of these things are straightforward and simple to do. The bad news is that you've probably already seen these things and chosen to ignore them. But the good news is I'm going to tell you anyway. So first, how to avoid or overcome feelings of stress and exhaustion. So my research led me to many great articles and resources, and I do have references at the end of this presentation as well as in the handout that I mentioned. But my research, they highlighted the importance of addressing two things. So the first one is to look at your work patterns to see if there's anything you can do to make your feelings about work a little less hostile. So research suggests if you're able to use your paid leave, you should schedule regular vacation days or even just half days rather than stockpiling these hours and never using them. Research also suggests using your lunch breaks as a chance to get away from your office. And if you prefer to bring your own lunch, that's perfectly okay. Just eat it literally anywhere besides at your desk. Another option is to check your institutional policy about 15-minute breaks. And if you get them, you need to use them. If you need to schedule them into your calendar and put a do not disturb message on there, then do that, because even small breaks and a change in scenery can help reset your brain. In fact, one article I found discussed how even just changing up your office decor or your desk arrangement can have a positive impact on your attitude. And then lastly, if you're feeling stressed and exhausted and you find yourself saying there just are not enough hours in the day to do everything, then you may not be very good at managing your time. And I think we've all been there. It's easy to get buried, but it's very hard to dig ourselves out. So we need to use our librarian research skills to find resources that provide strategies and options for understanding why you might have issues with time management and figuring out what methods work for you to take care of that problem. So these things are things that you can try by yourself. The bottom section there are things you'll need help with. So first is a therapy approach called cognitive restructuring. And this is a theme you might notice as we move on, but this is an approach that teaches you to recognize negative thought patterns that are contributing to a problem and practice techniques to help reshape those negative patterns. And these patterns can lead to really terrible things: depression, anxiety, relationship problems, self-defeating behaviors, all of which will only get worse if not addressed and treated. Next, if the stress you're feeling is from some kind of conflict, you need to speak with your supervisor or HR department to explore resolutions. They cannot read your mind. They may have no idea what's happening, even though to you it seems obvious. There are tons of proven strategies that can be used to address workplace conflict. And if you don't even try, then you're allowing a defeatist attitude to get in the way of your mental well-being. Next, it's important to advocate for better social recognition of the difficult work that you're doing. And I'm not trying to be the stereotypical millennial who says we should all get trophies for showing up to our paying jobs. But research supports that a simple, sincere comment from someone about the work we do can contribute to a more positive attitude. And if we manifest that atmosphere, and if we do it to others, they are likely to do it to us in return. Lastly, you need to be vulnerable and obtain social support from colleagues in your workplace and in your profession, because research has shown a positive connection between mental well-being and some kind of support system. And the fact that I think there are 45 people in this session means that it should not be hard to find someone who understands what we're going through and is interested in solving this problem. Okay, so next we need to look at balancing our work-home life. We are librarians and we are in the information profession, and information is everywhere and it is scary lately. So we need to do our brains a favor by finding relaxing ways to spend our time at home that is away from news or social media or people who assault us with information or any kind of information literacy need. And the methods on this slide were recommended by several different sources and are likely things that you've noticed circulating these last few months, and that's for a reason. And these are, again, simple things that we can try to do. DIY stress relief, music, reflection, focusing on our health, eating better, getting sleep, exercising to release those endorphins, exploring any kind of interest that will take our mind off of what's happening at work, focusing on the positive aspects of life at home. So again, we are not overwhelmed by negative things happening at work. And then engaging in those psychological well-being practices that I mentioned a moment ago, such as support groups, therapy, prayer, religious services, things like that. So now we're going to look at another way to avoid or overcome those prolonged feelings of stress and exhaustion. Now keep in mind that everything on that previous slide is going to help with this symptom, but what can really help is learning how to say no. So the concept of learning to say no should not be misunderstood as saying no to things you were hired to do or that are a priority in order to solve a problem or address a need. That being said, librarians are often people pleasers, and we have a job to do to get paid, but it's impossible to say yes to every single request or suggestion that is sent to us. I know personally that saying no is hard and is something many of us don't do because of our work ethics. However, there is a big difference between being known as a good librarian and being known as the person who will do anything anyone asks. So if this resonates with you, step number one is to read this NPR article that I have linked on the screen. It's very easy to find, but it's also on the handout that is on the page that we shared the link to. An NPR reporter interviewed a life coach named Natalie Liu. So she says, first we need to develop a better self-understanding about why we say yes when we don't want to. And she gives the example that sometimes marginalized people tend to say yes more often. And if that sounds like you may determine that's not a good habit to perpetuate. In my personal experience, I was the middle child between two brothers, so I was the peacekeeper, and I just wanted everyone to be happy, which was the main reason, among one or two others, for why I had a hard time saying no. And Natalie says to take time to reflect on what types of things stress you out and why, so that you can determine which situations you should say no to in the future. Next, we need to develop the habit of inventorying our time to determine if we are literally even able to say yes. We have to look at our calendars and figure out, if I say yes to this, what is the time commitment and when am I going to be able to work on it? And if we look at our calendars and they're filled with extra projects and auxiliary things, stuff that's taking us away from our primary job duties, then it's just no wonder we're anxious and stressed and exhausted. Next, we need to learn the difference between desire and obligation. So Natalie explains, if you do things from a place of guilt or obligation, it is guaranteed to lead to resentment. That's because when a people pleaser doesn't see someone spending the same amount of time or energy on them, that can make the people pleaser feel robbed. Now this point is more for our personal lives rather than our work lives, but if you'll remember, we need to balance the two. And if we are stressed at work and then we are also stressed at home, it will just eventually implode. Natalie then recommends pausing before answering. So if it's an email, just don't respond immediately. If they're talking to you on the phone or in person, just say you'll get back to them later. Natalie explains that pausing not only buys us a little time to consider the request and be mindful about our possible responses, but it helps us assess what's really behind the request. Was this a demand or just a suggestion? Does it need immediate attention or does it have a prolonged timeline? Do we need to ask for more information before committing? Pausing can lead to reflection, which quiets any of those anxious thoughts that could lead us back to those people-pleasing tendencies, which we know results in stretching ourselves too thin. Lastly, it is important for people pleasers to learn the art of the soft no. Now this one will take practice. So a hard no is short and firm and straightforward. It's what non-people pleasers do. It's very simple. No, but thank you for asking. Or thanks for asking, but I'm not able to do that. On the other hand, a soft no is more palatable to a people pleaser because it's more gentle, it's an easier letdown. It's something like, thank you so much for asking me to do this project. It sounds really exciting, but I don't have the bandwidth for it at this time. Natalie says that a common mistake people pleasers do when first learning to say no is giving way too much of an explanation or being over apologetic, which can either give the other person an opportunity to ask in a different way or ask for something else entirely, or it just confuses them. So if we stick with an elegant and short, soft no, then we might start to notice a shift in how we feel after resisting the urge to people please. We'll start to think, you know what, it's okay, that wasn't a mean thing I did, it was a very reasonable response and the world has not gotten worse because I said no. And ideally those feelings of stress and exhaustion will start to lift. Again, saying no is going to be hard for some people, and that's because it is hard. That's why there are articles and seminars and therapists to help us learn how to do it, and it's why I included this quote on the screen. In library school, I took a few user experience web design courses, and the first thing we learned was that you cannot please all the people all the time because it's literally impossible. There's absolutely no way to do it. It is a proven fact. Likewise, you simply cannot say yes to everything, and the more you try to do that, the more impossible you are making your life. And please listen to that wording. The people who are asking you for things are not making your life harder. It's you, when you say yes to those things, you are choosing to make your life hard. Speaking of choice, now we're going to talk about avoiding or overcoming those terrible feelings of cynicism and detachment. So some of you may be familiar with that fish market in Seattle where they throw the fish around and they yell and they involve their customers and they have an overall fantastic time doing their very cold, stinky, repetitive, physically demanding jobs. So in 1997, a video producer was there just making a marketing video, but he was watching them and he noticed they were sort of working by these 4 unspoken tenets, and he studied them and he interviewed the workers and he formalized it all as the fish philosophy, which he published in book form, but which has also expanded into an employee training program. So you can see these principles on the screen. The first one is choose your attitude. There's always a choice about the way we do our work, even if there's not a choice about the work itself. We cannot control how other people act, but we can control how we react. And then we can either choose to commit or choose to be in a bummy mood. You can see the other tenets as well. Taking our job seriously, but conducting ourselves in a fun way whenever it doesn't interfere with our work, and letting things flow efficiently. The next one is making their day. And that's when we're talking about our patrons and how can we find creative ways to engage them and respectfully include them. And then lastly is just how can we be present and fully engaged and inviting. And that's not just for our patrons, but that's our colleagues as well. Just like we choose our clothing or what we eat for lunch and what we watch on TV, we can choose to have a positive or negative attitude and include all of these other aspects. And it's kind of bizarre how once you get into the habit of mentally making that choice, because we react often without thinking about it, but when you start making a choice, it's a little crazy how much control we have over it. Now, when we combine this philosophy with all of the other methods for avoiding or overcoming burnout, chances are quite high, and there's research to back it up, that this will work. On the other hand, of course, if you go into this with a bad attitude, then you're not going to really try any of these methods, or you're only going to kind of pretend to yourself that you're trying, and you won't see any change, which will reinforce those cynical attitudes. Because while some things, like a change in work tasks, does have to come from other people, a majority of the approaches to burnout that is academically supported is based on what we as individuals accomplish using the resources and support available to us. Now, I do have a link on the screen from a professional blog, and she explains why fish philosophy is great, but she also does mention some criticism. So a man named Kevin Carson wrote a book called Fish Philosophy, Opiate of the Powerless, and he says that this philosophy, by sleight of hand, conceals the elephant in the room. We're not all equally powerless in the face of circumstances. Some people make circumstances and some people adjust to them. So the thing to remember, and this is the case for all of the methods for overcoming burnout, sometimes leaving a job is the only solution. But this philosophy is not about perpetuating toxic positivity and trying to make the best of an abusive or hostile situation. This is about understanding what is causing our burnout in order to determine that if our attitude is contributing to our unhappiness, we have to decide if this is something we're willing and able to change. Now we're going to look at a technique for avoiding or overcoming the problem of a loss or a threat of loss of resources, and that's through design thinking, which is the habit of creative approaches to problem solving. It is inherently centered on the idea of disrupting and reinventing as quickly as possible while being okay with failure as we work towards solutions. It relies on reinvention, efficiency, and searching for many solutions rather than a state of perfection. It is pretty specific to user experience and design, but I think it has broader applications. So if we can all think back to our most recent project of overhaul or committee work, we may have mixed emotions. We probably met all of our goals. It likely took a long time though. There was probably a lot of stress involved as we worked through drafts and reviews. We may have gone over budget or past the due date, and we may have been satisfied with the result rather than excited about it. In fact, we may already be thinking of ways to improve our final outcome. But the beauty of design thinking is that as you move through each stage, you really are sticking with that old phrase, work smarter, not harder. It's a framework centered on the mindset of making mistakes in order to make better choices. And it reminds me of a quote I saw online once, something like, "First ideas are just memories of old ideas." And that's the key to design thinking. It's getting out of our old habits, moving away from doing things like we've always done them, because clearly that's not working. Old thinking may have created this problem that we're trying to solve. And design thinkers learn to use their time in a very focused and specific way to create as many choices and options as possible, and frugally, and base it on data and understanding what the end user would desire the most and benefit from the most. One aspect of design thinking that really resonated with me was during the idea phase, where you're coming up with drafts and you ask for feedback. Now, I'm a lazy perfectionist, which means I procrastinate and then I work extremely hard to make something exactly the way I want it, and that causes a lot of stress. But when I learned that design thinkers spend very little time on extremely rough versions, and we're talking hand-drawn outlines on paper, and then they get feedback, not only have they not spent a ton of time perfecting something, but their audience is more likely to provide feedback on something that doesn't look final, and then the creator is more likely to listen because they've not spent days on this one perfect draft. And that is just one example of how approaching a problem, such as a loss of resources, with a design thinking mentality can contribute to quicker solutions. And I highly encourage everyone to review the handout I provided via that link, because there's a list of resources at the end, and several of them are about design thinking. And there's just so much to be learned from this method, and I think today's librarians are open to this type of mentality and have maybe even been practicing many of these principles. I really hope that at least a few of these methods I just shared with you are things you're willing to try. The handout I've mentioned has all of them listed and is a great resource not only for you to keep, but also to share with your administration. That being said, it's normal to experience occasional relapses. The key to maintaining a level of control over burnout is how you respond to situations that arise. And the more we understand the problem, the better we can solve it. When I first started experiencing burnout, it was my first library job, and I eventually realized I was never meant to be an outreach librarian, but I was lucky to have the support of a supervisor who allowed me to see a need in the library and address it through a change in my job responsibilities, which is why now I'm the online learning librarian. I had tons of time to figure this out. I just never did it because I was exhausted and stressed and cynical. But I had the benefit of knowing that my supervisor supported me, and I had the benefit of attending a conference presentation just like this, where I knew what I needed to do to address the problem. And it's only with all of these factors combined could I not just overcome my burnout, but maintain a sense of engagement with my work. If you are lucky to experience a change that allows you to be cured, for lack of a better term, then you just have to keep at it. That's how we maintain it. Diet, exercise, it's the same thing. Those contribute to our health, just like maintaining these habits. I would not blame a single one of you if you sat there looking at me thinking this is all much easier said than done, because that's true. Pretty much everything ever is easier said than done. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. And now hopefully you have a roadmap for how not to get stuck again. So I will leave there at 12:30. So sorry, I meant to leave time for questions, but I will now mute myself in case there are anyone who can stick around with questions.
Alrighty, so if anyone has any questions, please feel free, let loose in the chat, or chat's probably best, because like I said, we have a very large group. So either say in chat you have a question and I will get you unmuted and call on you, or just ask your question.
Okay, we won't prolong this anymore. If there aren't any questions, but if you think of something later, or if you were not that crazy about asking one in this type of setting, please visit the page that you see on your screen now, because there is an email me button on the side. And I encourage all of you to reach out to me if you have any questions about the presentation itself, or anything else you'd like to ask.
And I will share our information for this. There's several several links going to the link to the presentation, a link to the feedback form. Yes, Marie, the recording will be available later on our YouTube channel. There'll be a link. There's a link. I'm just about to put a big series of links in the chat about that. And I also ask, while I have everyone's ear, please consider attending our next presentation on Friday, November 20th, 12 p.m., 12:30 p.m. about scholarship and the tenure track librarian, tips and ideas to flourish. And I'll post that in chat now. And Sarah, thank you so much for this excellent presentation. I learned a ton. I had to have to laugh as a current outreach and user experience librarian myself, understanding the pressures and everything, really. But I will stop the recording. But if other people have questions, or anyone wants to stick around, or you have time and want to stick around, please feel free.
Actually, Rocco, there is a question in the chat. The question asks, Sarah, are you doing any activities on your campus involving this?
We don't really have any activities specifically addressing burnout, but we do a common end of the semester activity for students for stress relief. And to be honest, a lot of the things we have our students do are helpful for any kind of stress relief. So great question. Stress relief is key.
Thanks.